Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, regenerative LumumbaSpeaks.com. Back once again with another great show. As you know, we're here in conjunction once again with Beacon Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of Africans in the news and information. And we're here to have a great conversation. Part two, as by demand, we have part two of our show, Marvin Sapp from the Black Community should divorce itself from organized religion. So once again, family, make sure that you tap in to be part of the conversation. Definitely want to hear from you all regarding this issue, particularly snapshot reviews. Snapshot reviews, of course, he wanted me to do a part two. And so definitely hope he could tap in. We know he's over in the UK and it's almost midnight over there. But hopefully he could tap in, of course, and be part of the conversation. But of course, you're watching LumumbaSpeaks.com, Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, in conjunction with Beacon Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, in the home of African-centered news and information. And of course, we're excited to be with you here on this Sunday afternoon, here at the good old US of A, as they say. And we're going to, of course, engage in part two of the show. Many of you, some may be unaware of the controversy that brewed based on a video that came out from actually last summer, in which, of course, the gospel singer and minister Marvin Sapp was accused of aggressively soliciting donations, offering from parishioners at of course, a religious conference. And so we're here to have a conversation, really unpack that issue, why it's problematic, and to really ask the question, should the Black community divorce itself from organized religion? So once again, family, once you all to tap in and be part of the conversation, the link is in the description. The link will be in the chat momentarily. Before we get started, I want to go over the ground rules here at, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com. As many of you know, diversity of thought is welcome. So irrespective if you're on the left, you're on the right, or you're right down the middle politically, if you are religious, if you're agnostic, if you're an atheist, this is a conversation that you can come and be part of. Also, but most importantly, no racial epithets are allowed. No epithets of any kind are allowed. We prefer facts over feelings. So if you disagree with someone, attack the argument and not the person. Attack the argument, not the person. And no fundamentally false statements. So you can make a claim that's based on your opinion, but you can't make a claim that is adverse to facts. Okay, because it's my platform and I'm responsible for the information that is disseminated on my platform. So we want to make sure that we're providing information that is factual. And of course, our mission is in this to exonerate or vilify, but simply to challenge conventional wisdom and re-examine what has previously been accepted as fact. And as you all know, family, you can follow us on Twitter at Bakari Lumumba, on Medium, of course, an online and publishing platform for written content. You can also make sure you donate to the show, Cash App Lumumba Speaks, and of course, hit the super chat so that we can keep, of course, the show going. So with that being said, family, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a video, just rehashing, of course, what took place, what transpired, and then we'll jump right into, of course, the conversation. Just give me 1 second. Okay.
A long time ago that it cost to sit up here. Y'all don't like me. Y'all don't like me. Man, I'm telling y'all it cost. Went upstairs today to get my license and ordination renewed. I'm not telling you. I was 2 years behind. I had to pay $2,000 to get my ordination and my licensing renewed. I pulled out my credit card. I paid my $2,000. How in the world am I going to preach up here and not lead by example? He asked me to give $800. Went in my pocket, gave $800. Because leadership lead and they understand the cost that is involved. There's 1,000 of you, I said close them doors. Ushers, close the doors. Close the doors. Close the doors. We all leave together. Y'all ain't going no place but to the restaurant. There's 1,000 of you tonight, and those that are watching, it's 1,000 that's watching online. This is a small seed. If I get 1,000 online to give this, if I get 1,000 in the sanctuary to give this, that's $40,000 tonight. I'm challenging each of you all down here to give a $20 seed. I used to think $20 a lot of money. $20, believe it or not, when my late wife Melinda P. Sapp was alive, was a good date. I could take her to the movies, buy a box of popcorn, one soda, 2 straws. I wasn't cheap, that's swag. I was looking in her eyes, she's looking in mine. Can't do that no more. Everyone up here, we've all sold and seeded, but I need everyone standing up here with us, with me, to plant a seed $100. Because again, it costs to sit up here. I got just put hand on the bucket. Give me his worship. Give me his give me his, give me his worship. This ain't the time to talk. 1,000 people need to give $20. 1,000 people need to give $20. 1,000 people online need to give $20. This is easy, thanks. This is an easy miracle. We should be able to raise $40,000 tonight just from market.
So, yeah, family, I want you all to tap in. The link is now in the chat. The link is in the chat. The link is in the description. Tap in, be part of the conversation. Share with us, of course, your thoughts. Definitely hope snapshot reviews, but the snapshot reviews from, of course, the good old UK. You can tap in. Brother LMA, we know that you wanted us to do a part 2 as well. So hope we can hear from you regarding what you saw, your thoughts. Yeah. He says it pays to be in leadership. Sounds like a pyramid scheme to me. And of course, we kind of did a deeper dive regarding this subject matter, this topic from the first show. Then, of course, a number of people came out, of course, to defend him. Ricky Smiley came out. Of course, Marvin Sapp went on the Ricky Smiley show and talked about that the offering wasn't for him. And I don't think that's necessarily the issue. I think the issue is the lack of financial transparency. We know that many have argued that in the Black church and most religious institutions, they are financial black holes, right? We know that there are some who deviate from that, but we know it tends to be the norm that there's a lack of financial transparency. You don't know where the money is going. And other times that money is going to the personal coffers of the individuals who actually created the church, right? But we do understand that there's overhead, right? You got to pay for the house, the rent or the mortgage, broadband, electricity, lights. We understand that. But this tends to be a common practice. We know Booker T. Washington, in his seminal memoir, Up from Slavery, he discussed this. He says individuals would learn how to read and write, and they would all of a sudden yell that they were called to the ministry to get out of working in the fields and doing, of course, physical labor. So this tends to be an issue. But tap in, family. The link's in the description. Link is in the chat. If you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Make sure you hit the notification bell as well. Like, share, and subscribe. You're watching Lumumba Speaks in conjunction with, of course, Speak Online Network, the Pan-African Social Media Extraordinaire, and the home of African Center News and Information. So definitely want you all to tap in and be part of the conversation. But once again, pyramid scheme tends to be an issue. But the other issue, the major issue I have is just the lack of financial transparency. I think in any situation when you're part of an organization, if you're going to give your money, you should know 100% how those funds are being allocated. And we know, unfortunately, that tends not to be the case. When you ask questions, you shouldn't question the man of God, you shouldn't question God himself. some who, of course, are incisive in their thinking, would then make the argument, well, you should be to ask questions. The God is all knowing and all present, and you are a representative of an all knowing, omnipresent God, that you should be able to answer the questions that are being provided. We know that this is a hustle that's been going on in the Black community for years, right? For generations, right? Decades, centuries, one would argue, for over a century. So definitely want you all to tap in, share with us your thoughts on this matter. Share with us your thoughts on the matter. Once again, you're watching, of course, LumumbaSpeaks.com at Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always being on Black, in conjunction with People Line Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African news and information. Once again, hopefully, but an LMA and of course, Snapshot reviews can tap in and be part of the conversation, family. But the link is in the description. The link is in the chat. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can. You do not have to come up to be part of the conversation, and you do not have to use your actual name. So you can use a pseudonym to protect your identity, because we know this is a hot button issue. Oftentimes, individuals may work in particular industries where discussing these type of issues are it could be problematic for your employment, your livelihood. So we understand that, but tap in, be part of the conversation, family. We would love to hear from you regarding your perspective on, of course, this issue. Received a lot of fanfare, notoriety, but I would love to hear from you all regarding this issue. Marvin Sapp did come out and apologize for being aggressive in the manner that he discussed, the way he was soliciting donations. He's, of course, on Roland Martin's show, they came out defending him, and some of them said that he should have been even more aggressive. So that, I think, is a bit problematic as well, because the argument is that, yeah, people don't have to give, they don't want to, but they're being pressured to give. Not only the social pressure, but the person's also, they're also being very aggressive in trying to, of course, ensnare, of course, people to give money. So I think there are a number of issues here. But once again, we understand there's an overhead, there's a cost there, but we know more often than not, it's a lack of financial transparency, and much of that money is going into the coffers, of course, of the individuals who are involved in that institution. The other issue is, even though the money is being given, the parishioners don't typically have the ability to make decisions about how those funds are being allocated, right? How those funds are being used. So these are just some issues to consider. Mr. Sandman, how can I help you?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing all right.
That's good. That's good. Sacramento doing good business, huh?
We're doing all right, yeah.
That's what's up. Yeah, I heard that. I don't know how true this is, but they're talking about Trump is supposed to be making some changes to the African American Museum of Washington
Yeah,
D.C.
I heard about that, but of course we're talking about the part two of the issue with Marvin Sapp this afternoon.
Yes, sir. Yeah, man. It's I think that we as Black people, this might be a little provocative or antagonizing, but I think that we being a little bit hypocritical, because the pastor said something important before he asked for the money, or during the process of asking for the money. He said, "Where y'all going? You ain't going nowhere but the restaurant." Okay, so we, us as Black people, right? We have $1 trillion worth of spending power, right? Where's all our money going? To the Chinese food store, because our families don't cook Sunday dinner anymore.
Well, hold on. I think you're bloviating a bit. We don't know if people are not cooking family Sunday dinner anymore. But what we do know is there's a difference between choosing to take your money and go to an establishment and exchange your money for an actual service and food, than giving your money to an institution in which you don't know what's going to be done with it. Those are two different things.
Yeah, they are two different things. One is you just paying for something like physical that you can eat, or you're paying for your cell phone bill so you can, you know, talk
Mm-hmm.
to friends, or you're paying for your cable bill so you can watch your favorite television shows. But when it comes down to giving money to a black church, then all of a sudden it's an issue when the owners of all these other companies, they're not black at all.
Well, once again, I think this is a false equivalency, right? Because you're actually purchasing a product, you're paying for an actual service or product, right? So my cell phone, for example, I'm paying for a service, and that is, a mobile telephone. However, oftentimes with black churches, there's a lack of financial transparency. You're giving money, and you don't know what's being done with it, and you're getting nothing in return. So it doesn't matter if it's a black company, white company, or a black church, white church, or any organization. If there's a lack of financial transparency, I would behoove any and everyone not to give their money.
Right. So it comes to a point where, okay, if you got a church that's supposedly hoarding a lot of money, right? And you got a congregation that's supposed to be a part of that church, right? And keep in mind, right? And this is part of the reason why it tickles me to this whole situation, because it's really an effect of American capitalism and how it's way out of control. So basically, you the church, these religious institutions, when they receive donations from the congregation, that money can't be taxed by the federal government,
That's correct.
right? So that money goes straight to them, that they can use that money to do whatever they want with it. They want to open up stores, black-owned stores, open up housings, construction companies for the people in the community that might not be doing so well. So we have a platform to take our money to a place where Uncle Sam can't stick his hand into it and use that money to help build up our community. But it seems like nobody wants to even
Well, but
think
here's
about
here's,
that.
here's the issue, brother Sam, man. That's not what the money's being used for. It would be one thing if churches actually were using that money and opening African Centered schools, grocery stores, construction companies, but that's not what's being done.
Right. So
So
what
I
has
mean,
to
so what,
happen
so
is,
what I'm saying is that is a false argument. And we can see that was being done, but that's not what's being done. The money's being taken, and no one knows what takes place with it. But what we do know is that we don't see anything being done with the money that actually benefits the community.
right. And from
So
the
I mean,
outside
so,
looking
so,
in,
for example, and this is and Dale Smith, I hopefully you could tap in and you could be part of the conversation. And I would argue that they don't. I grew up in the church. My parents are ministers. I would make the argument that that is not the case. That is not practiced on a macro level. There may be some churches who do that, but overall, that is not the case whatsoever. Um, Back in January, I put out put a post on my show asking for donations. Right now, you gave a donation. I think two other people gave a donation. Right,
mm,
and and then you all would have gave that money, and then I wasn't streaming anymore. You'd be like, "What the heck? We gave you money to pay for the streaming subscription, and you're not streaming." Right? So
mm,
if I put out another post asking for donations, you'll be like, "No, what did you do with the funds that we gave you the first time?" That's just
right.
common sense,
Mm,
right? This is the issue people have with Umar Johnson's church. I mean, not church. I'm sorry, school. Donations, 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 and we still have yet to see an actual school running.
right.
So
And that,
that's the issue. That was is one thing if they're asking for donations to what we're going to create a school or we're going to start this business. That's different. You can say, hey, they're taking the money and they're using it for something that's beneficial to our community. But that's not what's taking place.
well, from the outside looking in, I mean, of course, I'm part of the black community because I'm black and all. But from the outside looking in, it seems like an easy fix I mean, if y'all really a part of that church and that part of that congregation, all you gotta do is go to the pastor or go to the leaders in the church and tell them, hey, we want some financial transparency. We want to invest in this so that it can build up this and part of our community.
Here's the thing, though. I grew up in a church. It's not that simple. If you were to make a demand like that, you would be considered insubordinate, right? And more than likely, you would be asked to leave. If you make any demands of church leadership, you're going to be asked to leave. Matter of fact, there was a situation, and I probably was like 9 to 10, where there was a situation where a sister made some demands. Right, and Dale Smith, you need to tap in. Like I said before, we understand the church has to pay bills, lights and gas aren't free, so on and so forth. I understand that completely. However, what should be done is there should be an accounting. Show the congregation this is the bill. Hey, congregation, the electric bill was $175 this month. It was $525 this month. Can we then you raise the money to pay the bill, right? But that's not what's going on, right? I have no problem with people putting in to actually pay the expenses to run the actual institution. But once again, the congregation never sees the bill. So we don't know what it costs. And then the bill is $175. You gathered $920 and you pocket the difference.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? So it's once again the lack of financial transparency. And I'm saying this there are institutions that are ran that way. Institutions that practice financial transparency are ran that way. For example, I was a member of a nonprofit organization. We had an actual physical building. That's the way we ran our situation, financial transparency. Here's the bill, this is the amount of money we need. So there are institutions that are ran that way. Unfortunately, many religious institutions aren't run that way, particularly in the Black community, because as Booker T. Washington stated in his memoir of slavery, the goal is to what? Get over like a fat cat financially. So these are some of the issues.
I feel like that's the pros and the cons of a capitalist system. Whereas though, if you have the church leaders in this church that won't acquiesce to the congregation's demands, then all you got to do is start another church right across the street that will. And you don't have to have a degree. I'm not sure. You probably know this a lot better than me. Do you have to have a degree to open up a church?
No,
in theology?
No, you don't. Now, some theologians argue that that's one of the downfalls of the Black churches, that you don't actually have to have any credentials. You could just turn your collar around and claim that you're now a minister. So Dale Smith, you say that's not what you're disagreeing with. So tap in and be part of the conversation. The link is in the description. The link is in the chat. You can tap in and be part of the convo. Then we can have a wider, open-end conversation so I can understand what you're trying to articulate, because I think I'm misinterpreting your argument via, of course, the chat. So hopefully you can tap in, be part of the conversation. Once again, Dale, you do not have to cam up. You do not have to cam up to be part of the conversation. And you do not have to use your actual name. So you can use a pseudonym to protect your identity, but we hope that you can tap in, be part of the convo. But I'm not just speaking of small churches. I've actually attended mega churches before. I'm friends with individuals who are part of mega churches, were in positions of leadership at mega churches. So it's not just small churches in which these things take place. This is a macro level issue in the Black community. And I would even argue in Christendom, right? Because part of one of the core concepts and themes, not only of Christianity, but even of all Abrahamic religions, is, of course, blind obedience. But that's a conversation for another day. We've had that critique on previous shows. Don't know how familiar you are with watching our content. But once again, please tap in. The link is in the description. I'm going to put the link in the chat once again. And I hope we could have a deeper dive so I can have a greater understanding of what it is you're trying to communicate. And once again, okay, Dale Smith, I see your picture in the background. You can turn your camera off now if you want, because you've been able to verify your identity, or you can keep it on, and we're going to bring you in momentarily. Okay, very good. Mr. Smith.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What I was saying, I'm sorry. What I was saying, or what I was disagreeing with you on is, I mean, I understand and value your experience, but one person's experience should not be spoken as in general to generalize all black churches
Right. But
because it's not some
real quickly,
churches.
because I was speaking from an anecdotal frame of reference, but there is a large body of scholarly literature to substantiate the claims I've made as well.
Yes, like I said, I don't take that away to say that there's a large body, but as I stated, when speaking up in terms of Marvin Sapp
Yes, sir.
or Mega Ministries, the people that were there in that ministry or in mega ministries are not just uneducated people.
No, I
Most
never
of them,
claimed that they were.
I didn't say you did. So please don't interrupt me because I'm not, I don't need you to defend yourself. I'm making my point that part of what you're saying is true. But then the other part of that I disagree with is I've been a part of two mega ministries
Okay.
where there are a lot of educated people. And even just in my HOA, there are a lot of people who say, well, the HOA is stealing money. They're not doing this. And
Well,
then the
what is
first
the
thing,
HOA? Real quick, what is the
a
HOA?
homeowners association. So when I said institutions are not ran like that, is when I said no institutions are ran like that, because there is a time and place for everything. You don't go before the congregation and tell, oh, we got a light bill due and the light bill is such and such amount. No, if the money is being coming and is given the way it's supposed to in a natural flow, you just pay your bills. That's what your treasurer and your secretary and your board of trustees and the deacons and that's what they're for. Those meetings are not closed. But in most cases, people will complain about it and said there's no transparency, but yet they never went to a business meeting. They never request that. And yes, it is legal that if anyone should say I need to know where the funds are going. And that pastor does not, because if they do have credentials that gives them a free tax incentive, they must then comply with all the other rules. There must be transparency. That's the business side of a church.
That's the legal part, but that's not something that we find by and large is practice.
Because the people are uneducated. That's what I was saying.
I'm not just saying uneducated, but I'm not going to make the claim that people are uneducated.
When I say uneducated, I'm not talking about having a degree in anything. Education just means knowledge. That's what I'm saying.
I would argue that a lot of it's being done just simply out of faith.
If a person has knowledge and they understand that, or they begin to believe that maybe the money is not going to where it needs to be going, and they don't have the voice to say, Pastor, well, what's going on with the money? If they don't ask anybody, then they're willfully blind to, just, they want to be taken advantage of.
Well,
those are typically not the people. But I'm saying that those people can't say.
You can't talk over me. It's my show. I would not argue that people are willingly choosing to be taken advantage of. Chris Jones, I see you there. I'm gonna get to your comment in a minute. I would argue, and as I said it before, one of the core things we find in Abrahamic religions is blind obedience. Right? I would argue that the people being socialized in these Abrahamic religions, particularly right now, we're talking about the Christian church, leads people not to ask questions, leads people to lean on faith, right? Rather than actually question. And I would argue if people actually knowledge, particularly from the African frame of reference, they would going to be practicing the Abrahamic religion. But that's a conversation for another day, right? However, once again, this is something that we do find by and large across the country, a lack of financial transparency in religious institutions, not just Black religious institutions, Latino, European, so on and so forth, right? White. This is an actual issue, right? So, as I say that, I've been a part of organizations in which there was extreme financial transparency because of the lack of financial transparency that we find in other institutions in our community. For example, I'm from Dayton, Ohio. Shout out to the Gym City 937, birthplace of aviation. The Dayton Urban League shut down due to a lack of financial transparency, right? They had no records financially on the books whatsoever. One of the issues that came up was with hiring the French Toast, what was there a lack of actual financial records? We come to find out the individuals who were running the Urban League had a church background and argued that, hey, well, we didn't have to actually have these type of records in the church. And so what we were doing was spiritually led. So we didn't have to have these type of records with the Urban League. And of course, as a result, it shut down. It had to be rebranded as the Miami Valley Urban League rather than the Dayton Urban League. And they had to rebrand it under being a derivative of the Cincinnati Urban League. So these are issues that we find that permeate outside of the church into actually Black culture, Black institutions, and Black organizations. So Chris Jones, real quick, Chris Jones, you say that brainwashing our people. Hopefully you could tap in, Chris, be part of the conversation so you can really unpack what you mean by that statement, that comment, rather than me seeking to speculate by what you mean. So once again, tap in, Chris, be part of the convo, and we hope to hear from you soon. Once again, as you know, the link is in the description, the link's in the chat. Once again, you know, you do not have to cam up to be part of the conversation. You do not have to come up to be part of the conversation. You do not have to use your actual name. So hope to hear from you soon. Any retort from Mr. Sandman or thoughts from Mr. Sandman or Dale Smith?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't know if this ties in it too much, but we talk about using the church so that we can help build a financial institution for the Black community. That's not happening now. But then, like, you think back in our history, what happened to Martin Luther King when he started talking about money? What happened to Malcolm X when he started talking about money?
Well, actually, hold on real quick. Well, Malcolm X, before Malcolm was deleted, he was discussing going to the United Nations and charging the United States with crimes against humanity. So we didn't see Malcolm actually pushing an economic issue when he was deleted. He was discussing charging the United States with crimes against humanity for the treatment of African Americans here in America per the United Nations.
Well, basically, my point is
right. Well, I mean, that was
like you said in the past, that whenever we try to build something, somehow it gets taken down. And this seems like an easy pathway to take untaxed money and use that to build up our community. But it seems like all the pastors are scared to touch it. It's almost as if they know if you use that to build us up economically, they're going to come for us.
Well, I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of individuals, that's not their pure concern at all. For many, what we find is that their concern is, of course, saving souls, having a religious institution, and then, of course, pocketing the money for themselves. But oftentimes, if you're dealing with individuals who are of a religious background, it's not common to find an individual who is focused on, of course, Black empowerment. Right? We know there are some examples, but that tends to be the exception to the rule. Right? We know there are some examples of Pan-Africanists, for example, who were Muslim, Pan-Africanists who were Christians, Pan-Africanists who were atheists, right? But we know typically individuals who have a religious background that focuses on their religious beliefs rather than actually doing something that will benefit a particular racial or ethnic group of people.
What
So
a problem!
I wouldn't argue that it's because they're afraid. I just don't. Because for someone who grew up in it, someone who's well versed in, of course, the black church, Black theology, that's just not a concern.
Well, do you think that because the church isn't obligated to pay taxes, that they have to acquiesce to the Constitution over, like, Black versus white and so on and so forth, over racial issues?
What do you mean by acquiesce to the Constitution?
Because it states that, you can't, like, it's a civil rights thing. You can't discriminate against people based on their ethnicity. So if you're going to take money that's untaxed, that the federal government can't tax, and say it's particularly just for the Black community, that's going to be looked down upon, like somehow the system going to get at you, like you can't get taxed.
Well, no, that's not the issue at all. It's just that's not their clear concern. For example, Jeremiah Wright has that's the church that Barack Obama went to in Chicago. Their church practiced Black liberation theology. Right? They're a 501c3 organization. So it is an issue of people being afraid. That's just not what they're about. They're just not about that life. When you talk to most Black pastors or theologians, they know nothing about Black liberation theology or Black power or Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism. These concepts are alien to them. Literally. So it's not a situation where they're afraid. They don't even know what the hell you're talking about.
Mm.
Mr.
So
Smith.
Jeremiah Wright is his church still open?
Yeah, still open. He's the pastor emeritus now. He's retired, and there's someone else who, of course, is the pastor now. But yeah, but the church is still open.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, for another example would be Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, right? We know Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was the pastor, and then Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was the pastor, right? Abyssinian Baptist Church practices Black liberation theology. If I remember correctly, and somebody could quote me on this if I'm wrong, but Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church that Dr. King, of course, grew up at, and of course was at one point a pastor on the east side of Atlanta, in the east side of Atlanta, they practice Black liberation theology. So it is an issue of individuals being afraid, because you can practice whatever the derivative of Christianity that you want. It's just these individuals simply aren't even knowledgeable of these concepts and ideas. For example, and I could give an example. My sister has a best friend who we grew up with in church, and she's an actual national recording artist. She's a national gospel recording artist, and she is a member of, I think, Joyce Meyer's ministry. So Joyce Meyer, if I remember correctly, is a white woman. She's a televangelist, right? She's, of course, became very wealthy as a televangelist. She's from St. Louis, from the St. Louis area. So she went and ended up being hired by Joyce Myers to actually be a worship leader in her mega church. So we're talking via Facebook, and I asked her, I said, hey, I'm not going to use her name. I said, are you familiar with Black liberation theology? She said, no, I've never even heard of it before. Right? So a lot of people just aren't even knowledgeable of these concepts, let alone afraid to actually utilize them or implement them. Mr. Smith, go right ahead.
Well, my only question about this is, from looking at what the statement was, that Marvin Sapp and why the Black community should divorce itself from organized religion. To me, like I say, to say that there isn't transparency would be an overstatement or over exaggeration, because by and large, I don't believe that there is, in general, especially for a church like Marvin Sapp or a mega church. Like I said, and when I said first that no institution is ran like that, when I said that, I mean, like, even from your house, you wouldn't tell your children in your house where these are all the bills that I got to pay. If you could, but most people don't. Most people don't do that.
I do. I've done that with my children.
I said you could.
Yeah.
Like I said, you could, but most people don't.
We'll put, that's a false equivalency when we use the household example, because the children aren't actually, you're not asking the children to contribute financially. So that's a false equivalency.
Some children I did when I got a job and was working as a teenager, I was contributing.
Right,
so
right.
It's not false, and I'm one of 10.
Hold on. It is a false equivalency to state that because people in their household don't make the children aware of the monthly household expenditure, that it is untoward or unbecoming to then have that expectation for a church. That once again, that's a false equivalency.
That's not a false equivalent, because this is my experience.
Right.
And that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying before about your experiences, or a whole group of people experiences should not be spoken as in general, as it is a bigger swath or a bigger band of all of it.
Of scholarly literature to substantiate the claim that I've made as well. So this isn't just conjecture or innuendo coming from, of course, my personal anecdotal experience.
That's what it sounds like.
But once again, as I stated, there's a large amount of scholarly literature to substantiate what I've said as well. Right? Scholarly literature, meaning it's peer review, meaning
I know what scholarly means, doctor.
Right? It has to be substantiated. You can't make a claim without being able to back it up.
Well, perhaps, but in this present day and time, we got the government, the United States government, making claims that they can't back it up, that they are absolutely false.
You're moving the goalposts. We're not talking about the government right now. We're talking
You
about
talking about scholarly? You was talking about scholarly, and method in academia. I'm not moving the goalposts. I'm just saying where it really is.
but we're
Because
not
anybody can say anything. They can put anything in the book, and it don't necessarily mean that it's true.
once again. However, with scholarly literature, you can't make it won't be published unless you make a claim that you can substantiate. That is the difference, right? In scholarly literature, if you make a claim, you have to be able to substantiate it. I mean, you have to be able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that what you're saying is factual. And if you can't do that, your article, your book chapter, whatever, won't be published. You would have to go self-publish, right? Rather than actually have it be peer reviewed.
But that used to be a standard, but that standard is no longer holds.
No,
That standard no longer holds.
no.
You've got people, we've got the people at the CDC that's saying that.
You can't overtalk me. This is my platform. Number two, one of my rules is you cannot make a claim that is adverse to facts. I work in the academy. I'm a PhD. I work in the academy. I've had a career in academia for the past 12 years. That is still the standard in academia. Still, I just sat in on somebody who was defending their dissertation Friday. That is still the standard. So once again, you can't make claims that are adverse to facts simply because you don't like the facts. Would you agree with that, Brother Saint Man?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you say. When you say substantiated, it has to be, it's kind of like a gray area when we're talking about social.
No, it isn't. I'm going to give you an example. If I was to make a claim that the Black community has been under a system of social control that began with slavery and ended with Jim Crow, I could prove that by showing a system of social control via chattel enslavement, sharecropping, Black codes, Jim and Jane Crow. I could substantiate that through laws that were on the books. So, or if I say Black people were prohibited from actually being able to read and write during the Holocaust of enslavement, I can prove that by going to the records from the 1940 South Carolina legislature and showing laws that were written put on the books saying that Black people aren't allowed to read and write. It's actually black and white.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you saying that? Yeah, you can bring up historical facts, but to say that it has a certain sociological impact on a group can be construed as subjective.
Well, it would depend on what the argument you was making. For example, Malcolm X oftentimes made an argument that the Holocaust of enslavement and the subsequent forms of social control that Black people face caused Black people to turn to alcoholism and drugs as a escape from the hell that we actually were dealing with. Many people argue well, Malcolm was bloviating. He's simply making these Black nationalist type of statements. However, I actually ended up reading a book by Dr. Michael Gomez, who was a professor of African American history at NYU, titled Exchanging Your Country Marks, The Development of African American Identity in the Colonial and Antebellum South. And in that book, he talked about that actually enslaved Africans and their descendants actually turned to abusing drugs and alcohol as a way to escape the hells of chattel enslavement. So we found that the claim Malcolm X was making was factual. But once again, this is what we have. This is what happens, and I'm gonna bring you in, LMA. This is what happens when you have people who are anti-intellectual, right? When you have individuals who are anti-intellectual, this is what happens. They prefer to say, well, facts don't matter. That's not real scholarship. Anybody can write something in the book. The brother just stated that he knew what it meant to be peer reviewed, what scholarly literature is. Then he comes back and says, well, that's not how scholarly literature actually works, which is, of course, patently false. Right? But this is what happens when you provide facts and people don't like the facts. Right? Go right ahead.
Yeah, from my point of view, it said that the peer review process isn't as intensive as it used to be. Is how I interpret what the the last brother said when he was
Who,
up
who,
here.
who,
Not
who,
that
who
it
is,
doesn't happen.
that's what he said. And I would make the argument that is patently false. Because when you ask people, okay, give me an example, they can't do so. Because if you've gone through the peer review process, you will know that it is intensive. I know because I just revised and resubmitted an article for a publication. And they go through that mofo with a fine tooth comb. I've engaged in this, I actually am a reviewer for an academic journal. One of the reviewers, like when you submit a journal for publication, there are several people who actually review your document. And I'm one of the reviewers. And you got to go through that thing with a fine tooth comb to make sure every claim that person's made is factual. So as someone who's actually does this for a living, I know what the man is saying is false.
Yeah, see, I love the process of peer review. It's the foundation of a lot of scientific research, but part of that research is what they call repeatability, and I think maybe the LMA could go more deeper into it with his engineering prowess. You can say, okay, well, racism caused black people in America to be in this position, but if there's only one example of black people being subjected to this stuff in the experiment called the United States of America, then you don't have the repeatability to say that that's it. That is, in fact, a fact.
Well, actually, we find that the issues that black people face here in America, we face globally, right? Or we could just subject it to black people here in the Western diaspora. So we know that actually would, of course, undermine the argument that's being made. But Brother LMA, I'm gonna let you tap in because I know you stated you were one of the individuals, one of the brothers who argued that he wanted a part two to, of course, this show. So I'm gonna allow you to speak your piece.
What's going on, Dr. Lumumba? Can you hear me okay?
I'm doing quite all right, and I appreciate you being a contributor and a donator to the show.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, I'm kind of coming in late. I think YouTube is hating because I'm not getting a notification when you go live. So
Listen,
I think
man,
YouTube is.
you got the 17,000 person who's told me this. I don't know why that's the case, but a lot of people.
YouTube is hating, man. I caught the tail end of it, and
did you hit the notification bell?
I did hit the notification bell. Yeah. YouTube is hating.
Okay.
So can you remind me of the topic that what's the most prevalent topic of this for this discussion?
So of course Marvin Sapp, he was at an actual convention last summer.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he aggressively was requesting the parishioners to give money. Right, he told the ushers to close the doors, close the doors, close the doors, close the doors, close the doors. I said close the doors. Y'all ain't going anywhere but to the restaurant anyway. Many people took umbrage with him aggressively soliciting donations, telling people to close the doors as if they didn't have a choice to leave. Some people argue that, one of the times that you're not allowed to actually get up and walk in church is doing, of course, people giving offering. I grew up in church. I've been to several churches throughout the country throughout my life. I've never heard that. I've never had anyone tell me that I couldn't get up and walk around when people were giving offering. I was actually an usher. When I was a child, I was a youth usher and I was the head youth usher. And we were never told, I was never told as the head youth usher that we were not to allow people to walk while offering was being given. So I don't know where that's coming from. I think this is just a situation of individuals making claims that are patently false to try to cover up, of course, their aggressive push for donations. They didn't argue that, well, people didn't have to give, but when you're closing the doors and inferring that someone can't leave and they're being extremely aggressive, there's pressure for a person to give. The brother came on and was arguing, well, I said that it needs to be a financial transparency. He said no institution is ran that way. He gave an example of in a home, you don't tell your children what the monthly bills or monthly expenditure is.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. I said I actually do, but once again, that's a false equivalency because your children you aren't soliciting funds from your children to cover those monthly expenses.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So these are the type of subterfuge that we find taking place where individuals are trying to engage in a verbal sleight of hand to try to justify this type of behavior.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, as far as what was the guy's name? Sapp? Yeah. As far as that goes, I mean, I'm not going to stress too much. I mean, he was putting pressure on the parishioners to give. I'm not going to put too much stress on that because I know most organizations need funding. Now I'm gonna, for me, like I've said before, like I'm, I'm a non-believer, or atheist, or whatever. I wouldn't be able to anyway. But I've
Right.
been a part of other organizations that solicit for donations, and some of them, I ain't gonna lie, could be a little pushy. So I'm not gonna fault him too much on that. But like I said, that's just, I'm not gonna worry about this when I have a lot more issues with, organized religion. I'm not gonna worry about the funding. You know what I'm saying? So I get it, because like I said, sometimes you gotta solicit for funds, because you can't tax them, so
Well,
they have to come out of their.
and here's the issue. Marvin Sapp came on and he said, well, if 10,000 people give $20 or thousand people get $20, we have $40,000, right? And God just told me this. And so growing up in church, I don't know if you grew up in church, Brother LMA, this tends to happen where they always saying God told them people need to give. And that really is a form
Yeah.
of manipulation.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I know this because I was being groomed to be a preacher. So I was on the other side
Mhm.
of it, being told what to say, how to do it, what mannerisms to use, how to pull people in.
Yeah.
This is right. So they're just manipulating people to get money out of them.
Yep.
God ain't told you to
Yeah.
do nothing. And if a voice is telling you something, you need to go see a psychiatrist. Seriously.
Yeah.
We need to stop
Yeah.
the games here.
Yeah.
So,
Like I said, I mean that part what you said, I definitely agree with. Is kind of manipulate, because like I said, you're always going to manipulate people based off of their emotions and pulling on their heartstrings. Like I said, that I get. I definitely have issues with that. Maybe he could have just found a better way of raising funds. But that's usually been the church's MO. Like, try to guilt you and shame you and all this other stuff. But like I said, I can't, like I said, I've seen other organizations, not as, like I said, not, they never locked you in a damn,
right.
close you in a room and said you can't leave until you give out $20. I never
Right.
seen anything like that. But
I'm also, I'm sorry, go right ahead. I got to
no,
go
I was going to say that I can kind of see that because he may have a familiar relationship with the church, that he can feel like he can get, because like sometimes we maybe play around with like friends and family, and we may get a little rough or pushy with them because we know that we have a familiar relationship with them.
right.
We can get away with it. I wouldn't do that with
That makes
somebody
sense.
that I just don't know or organize
That makes
or yeah. So I will give him that. Like I said, I got plenty of other things on my list of, of issues I have with Christianity, organized religion, or the Abrahamic religions. I have plenty of things on my list against them. This one is kind of fun. Like I said, it's the issue is, to me, that like I said, are you going to be a part of this organization or you're not? You know what I'm saying? If you're going to
Right.
sit down in the pews, you know what's expected of you. If you
Right.
really got an issue with it, then enjoy your Sundays and stay in the house and wash your car, do whatever you want to do. So
Well,
like I'm not gonna.
Here's the other issue. This is why I will push back just a little bit. And I got your message, Brother Sam, man. I appreciate you. Hopefully, you come back. We'll still be going live. And I argue, and I think you would agree here as well, Brother LMA, that oftentimes we find brothers and sisters may come to the church because they're seeking some type of help, some type of mentorship, some type of way to be able to successfully traverse the issues, the vicissitudes of life, right? They come in good faith, and then they find themselves being manipulated because they're leaning on faith, the substance things hoped for, the evidence things not seen. That's a concern that I have. But I've also seen situations in the church where, let's say, a young person got straight A's in high school or middle school or something. And then they say, well, we want to reward our young people, so we're going to raise an offering for these two young men that got straight A's in high school. Right? But once again, people are giving money and they know what it's going to. That's all I'm asking, is that you're collecting funds. People need to know where the money is going to be allocated.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
I don't think that's too much to ask.
Yeah, I mean, but that's that whole churches are what's it called exempt from reporting and taxes and stuff like that, so they generally don't have to. So, because I know, like I said, I'm part of an organization, and like I said, we got we're 501c3, so they have to give a reporting of where the funds are going and who's getting this and that. We have to do that, and I do think if we're going to have these types of churches, like they need to pay up. Either they need to open up their books, or they need to pay taxes just like everybody else. It's one or the other. If you want to have special tax exemption, okay, then anybody can just I think anyone should be able to come up with a religion, a spiritual framework, and say, hey, I'm open up a religion. I won't put up a church, and I don't want to pay taxes.
Well, and you actually
I
find
mean,
people who do that. I've even seen situations where individuals were incarcerated. They couldn't
yeah,
get a job, so they decided to say, I'm a minister now. Open a
yeah.
storefront and start soliciting funds to be able to, provide for themselves. So these are things that actually happen. And I told the brother, I said, growing up in the church, going with my father to revival, so on and so forth, I saw that this was a financial business. It was a financial business,
Mm.
right? I saw individuals, in situations where if people say, well, hey, hold on, we're giving this money, what is it being allocated, used for? Well, they say, well, you don't question the man of God.
Oh yeah, see that's bullshit.
Right,
That
right. I
is,
mean,
yeah,
but seriously, this is a real thing. And then it's okay, we're going to have you leave. If you're going to keep pushing this, you're going to have to leave. These are things I've
yeah.
actually witnessed. And so, like I said, I told the brother, I said, this isn't just anecdotal. There's scholarly literature to substantiate this. Then we get into
Who was that?
scholarly literature. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Who was that? One pastor that had the deposition, and they
I know
found out how
I
much.
know who you're talking about. He's in
It's
Michigan.
Taylor. Taylor is
Yes,
something. It's Taylor.
David Taylor.
Taylor.
Yeah, no, it was David Taylor. And then every time they asked him a question, he was feigning ignorance. Feigning
Yeah,
ignorance.
yeah, yeah. David. Yeah,
Hold
David
on,
Taylor. That's right.
hold on.
David
So
E. Taylor.
is this a? They was like, is this a home or is this a retreat
Center.
center? I mean, which one is it?
Yeah.
You're gonna have to talk to the person who handles that.
Yeah.
Well, why are you spending all this money on, Gucci and I sweat out my clothes when I'm preaching, but why can't you just go to
Yeah.
Macy's? Why do
Yeah.
you need a $4,000 belt?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, and that's the type. Yeah, and that's the type of stuff you run into when you don't have any type of transparency in where the funds go.
Yeah, and the
You
thing
know?
is, like I told the brother, it isn't about people being uneducated. We're not talking about educated in
No.
terms of just degrees and credentials, but actually being incisive. It's because they actually are having faith.
Yeah.
Right? And so faith, and I appreciate Mr. Sandman, my Pan-African donation. Amen. Right. Ashe, we say Ashe, right? What we find is a situation in which there was a documentary, I think, on Dateline NBC where the guy said, I received an email or a message on Facebook, and I thought that telling me that I should visit this church and become a member. And, I thought that, this was God's inspiration. Then when I went to the church and became part of the membership and the leadership, I realized that they actually had a call center where they were cold calling people and had an actual algorithm where they were reaching out to people's DMs. It had nothing to do with God.
You think? Hold on a second. He received the what? What type of? How did he receive a message?
It was, I think it was a message via Facebook Messenger.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
people are just operating on faith. And I
Yeah.
we tend to be critical of faith, right? You and I.
Yeah.
But I think these people are actually operating, and please push back if you want. People are oftentimes going to these institutions in good faith.
Yeah.
Right? I think people are going to these institutions in good faith, and then as a result, they find themselves being, of course, taken advantage of. Because as I said, and we've said this before, one of the core tenets of Abrahamic religions is what? Blind obedience.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. Like I said, I think about just the history of Black people here in America. Just like you have these pastors. Okay, I'll give. Well, actually, I can't even say that. I was going to say I was giving the churches some leeway. Churches during the civil rights movement, I think they had a little bit more substance to them. But let's say
Yes, sir.
post civil rights churches, and I think to myself, you got Black people's ear for 2, 3, 4 hours every Sunday, and what are you telling these people? You know what I'm saying? Like if I have, what I'm saying? Think about like if John Henry Clark or Amos Wilson had that many Black people's ear for 4 hours every Sunday, where would we be?
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
That's something that I told Brother Sandman. He said, well, maybe they're afraid to push, a Black liberation theology type message because they might lose their 501c3 status. And I said, I would disagree. I think you know this, most Black preachers, they've never even heard of Black liberation theology. They've never even heard of Black power, Pan-Africanism, and Black nationalism.
But here's the question, though. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, but then there goes the question of what you said. What's more important, you preaching Black liberation theology or your 501c3? What's more important?
Right.
What do you think is going to do you more,
Take precedent. Yeah.
be more beneficial in the long term?
Right.
Come on, bro. And two, what is your God? You say you listen to God. What is God telling you to do right now? And if God is telling you, hey, protect your 501c3 status, as opposed to giving the word of Black liberation, I think we got our answer as to how we should be moving forward. That's just me.
Right. Yeah. No, I like how you engage in Socratic questioning there. You ask a question that
Yeah.
elicit, and help the person find the answer to the actual issue. So beautiful
Yeah.
work there. But yeah, this is a real issue. This is a real issue. And like I said, the brother stated, the present presidential administration are making claims that are false. I said, once again, you're moving the goalposts. We're not talking about the United States government or the Trump administration right now. We're talking about the Black church, right? You keep moving the goalposts, keep trying to move the goalposts, right? You know how when you get in trouble, Sammy wrote on the chalkboard. We're not talking about Sammy right now. We're talking about YOU. Right? So part of that is an attempt to deflect.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to deflect from the issue at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I would like to see, and I do feel as if there's we're seeing a lot more people, especially a lot more Black people, becoming, stepping away and becoming more humanist, atheist, agnostic. I think that's a good thing. But like I said, I would like to see more. And, like I said, I just want to, I think, I'm not going to say that, or how can I put this? I think that the Black church, performed a useful function in society. There's this one, I was listening to this one video, this one lady said it best. She said, what you needed to survive is not going to make you thrive, or something like that. Or what helped you survive may not help you thrive, or whatever. And I can definitely see how the Black church helped us survive. You know what I'm saying? Because we were under, explicit, hostile, racialized aggression. And so I guess maybe in some recesses of white supremacist mind, if this, I'm gonna say, in their words, if these people worship the same God as I do, maybe I should go slightly easier on them. You know what I'm saying? And maybe that was just some type of survival mechanism or whatever. But now that we have cell phones and encryption and internet and all this other stuff, we have more mature philosophical modes of thinking. I just don't think that this is what we need. I think it was good for that time. I'm not gonna say it's good. It was what we had. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like pig intestines or whatever, right? Yeah, you can survive on pig intestines when you ain't got nothing else. But now that you got the whole hog, the whole cow, the whole chicken, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense for you to be eating chitlins anymore, unless you just happen to like them. But there's no reason for that in today's
stuff. There are some people who happen to like them.
I know, that's what I was like. I thought about that. Like, there are also people who like chitlins or whatever, but I was just trying to make an analogy. We had to eat the chitlins. We had to eat the pig guts because we had to.
You're right, and I think you bring up a good point that oftentimes people are engaging these behaviors because of socialization. They aren't being taught to be critical of wondering, why are we engaging in this behavior? Why are we eating this food?
Yeah.
Why are we practicing this religion? Why are we believing in what we're believing in? When you talk to most Black people who are Christians, right, they are actually unaware of the fact that Black people came in contact with Christianity via colonialism and the slave trade. They're literally unaware of it.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean,
particularly,
we know Brother Dwayne Omawale, who's a resident historian here at Lumumba Speaks and People on Network. He discussed, so he's doing some work with the church right now, really pushing the Pan-Africanist agenda. But he talked about how he called me maybe 2 weeks ago and said, you know what, Brother Bakari, you were right, that for most people who are Christian, their goal is not Black empowerment or even to address the material needs of our people. It's simply to get people to be believers in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Point blank period. Nothing else matters. I said, exactly. That's a problem.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if people can't read or write. It doesn't matter if people don't have access to clean drinking water. It doesn't matter if people don't have an actual functional education that will help them be able to have a competitive advantage so they can provide for themselves and their family and have a fruitful life in society. That doesn't matter. Just believe in Jesus. That's a fucking problem. We need to be addressing the actual needs of our people. That doesn't matter. We see a lot of our black people are dealing with self-hatred. They hate the fact that they're black. They hate the fact that they're African, but they love Jesus. Well, that doesn't help because you're still engaging in racially self-defeating, disempowering, and self-destructive behavior. And you can't pray self-hatred away.
Yeah.
That's a mental health issue.
Yeah.
Right? So that means in the actual, so that's why when the brother was like, when someone's educated, I said, well, I would make the argument, right? That if you have an African-centered education, you wouldn't be in a damn church to begin with.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right? If you want to keep it a buck, because we don't have to go into the, the widely used notion where, the white Jesus, the religion itself is anti-black. And it's been that way since its inception. And I have the literature and the historiography to back it up.
Yeah. But let me say, I have heard of and I briefly saw videos on, they talk about atheist churches or whatever, which is kind of
I've heard of that. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
But I honestly, I just think that, like, as a survival mechanism, I think that the church provided like a social gathering function. And while and I think in a lot of black folks' minds that we just merged we conflated the two as a social gathering, and then just kind of added to this religious thing where just like these two things are separate. You can have a social gathering that is like philosophical and get you thinking. That doesn't have to have a religious aspect to it. And I was thinking to myself, like, what if there was we met every Sunday, but instead of being religious, it was like a TED Talk style conversation where instead, because like you think about it, pastor will be up there for like, give them about 45 minute sermon, whatever, right? What if it was, you come in, you got the same band playing, they're playing music, they're playing live music and, inspirational music. And then it'll be like a TED Talk style where they talk about just anything to just kind of get you thinking. And obviously it'll be geared towards self-improvement, community organizing, liberation, or whatever. And you could just have that. And then that way you can make it lively or whatever, or it can just be a news commentator. I've seen a lot of you see on YouTube, people do their lives or whatever, and they just talk about the news. You know what I'm saying? And they give their opinion on the news. And you look at the thing, and they'll have like, 1,000 people listening to them at one time. You know what I'm saying? So to me, I think that the desire is there. We just don't have the mechanism or just the willpower to do it, because we just think that Sunday belongs to the church. And I would love to see, it'd be crazy to see, like, like a TED Talk Sundays, you know what I'm saying? Where people just kind of come in, I'm assuming this is what like the atheist church would kind of look like, but we just need a social gathering spot that, that talks about empowering us, whatever empowers Black America, Black, Pan-African empowerment, hour every Sunday. We can we can carry over all of the things you like about the church. You get dressed up, we can have the live music, we can have the cook, like the little the kitchen in the back, serving up plates. We can carry out all that stuff over and just leave the white Jesus and just leave that behind. And we can carry all that stuff over. And I think that would provide a better avenue to kind of get people thinking. Because like to me, what bothers me is, like I said, if the pastor has, just black church in general, the black church has the ears of thousands and thousands and thousands of black people every Sunday for 4 hours, it needs to get you thinking. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not thinking, like, there's like some type of curiosity, or I just can't. I mean, if you think about it in terms of a class, right? You took a class, we both took classes or whatever. That's like 3 credit hours. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're in this thing for 3 hours, 2 hours every Sunday. You know what I'm saying? Man, that's a daggone. That's like a PhD level of credit hours you're accumulating, and it's like, what are you coming away with? And I find it to be, it's disappointing, but I think if if you think about it, I mean, this religion's been with us for, how many thousand, well, this particular religion has been with us for the last, what,
Two
500,
2000.
well, I'm going to say particularly with African American, Black Americans here, I see about the
Oh,
last 400, maybe 500 years or so. So it's going to take a
right.
little time to dislodge it, but I think that we're getting there. And I think that, what we just need is like, 'cause I got family members too who are, kind of into that stuff. I got one, I'm breaking one away. I just need to break a few more away. But I think we just got to, get them to, you know, put the claims of the Bible, put the claims of their pastor, and just put it towards reality. Almost like you said with your peer review process. Okay, the pastor said this, your Bible said this. Okay, look at what just happened last week. How does, what I'm saying? There needs to be some type of disconnect here, right? Where the things
Right.
that your pastor is saying versus what's going on in the world,
Right.
it's yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you 100%. And then, we really didn't really dive into one of the major issues, and that is, most black churches are financial black holes. Right, a lot of money
Yeah.
goes in, but nothing comes out. There isn't a return on investment. So, brother, not brother LMA, but brother Sandman stated, well, a lot of black people, if they would leave church and they would go to a restaurant, or you're paying your cell phone bill. I say, yeah, but you're actually getting something
You're
out
getting
of it,
something out of it. Yeah,
right?
you're getting a service out of
You're
it.
getting a return on your investment.
Yeah. Now, I will say some churches are better than others, and some of them will provide little after school or like tutoring or some shit like that. But it's not
Mhm.
enough of them. Like this should
Yeah,
be, you know what I'm saying?
but,
This
but,
should
but,
be obvious. Yeah.
but here's the issue, and I don't mean to cut you off. For example, there was a summer art program that my son went to at a church. So I knew
Mhm.
his mom signed him up. I already knew. I said, this is going to be a problem. This is when he was 9. So this is
Yeah.
2017. Summer 2017, he was 9, and he turned 10 in August. I said, this is going to be a problem. So one day he comes to me. He's like, I don't want to go back. And I said, why? He says, because I'm trying to learn how to paint. And, I like to draw. And the guy just keeps talking about Jesus. And he said, I don't want to hear that. I just want to learn how to paint. So my son is like, can you, so I'm like, all right, I'm going to go up there. So I show up, and, I got on like a muscle shirt and shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Intimidation.
Right. So I let them know that this is the issue my son raised to me. They're like, oh, but why didn't he tell us? I said, well, he's a child. It's not his place to tell you that. He told me, and I'm letting you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, oh, well, we like him, your son being here. We would like for him to stay. And my son was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't feel comfortable because you all finagled me. You told me I was going to learn how to draw and be an artist. And every time I show up, all this dude is doing is talking about Jesus. So, I'm not learning how to draw. I remember him saying this as a 9-year-old. So that tends to happen as well, to where, okay, we're going to create this literacy institute, right? But instead of kids actually learning how to read, they're just, once again, proselytizing. For example, there was a track organization, like AAU track. My son wanted to run track. The issue was but instead of pushing track, they were pushing religion, and I remember. So I went to a actual practice. After the practice, they sit everyone down and they say to them, just want to let you all know, young man, that the only way you can be a responsible man is if you believe in Jesus.
Oh, really?
So I was like, son, get your stuff, let's go. So I went up to him, I said, listen, that isn't true. There are numerous men who are responsible and they weren't Christians. Like, what are you talking about? And they was like, well, okay, yeah, what you're saying is true, but that's still what we're going to teach them. So I said, my son ain't coming back here. You're making claims that are patently false. So now you're just indoctrinating people. So then the issue is, okay, if that's why Dr. Amos Wilson talks about, if you're going to have any type of programs, initiatives in the community, it doesn't need to be church-based, because the reality is they're going to use whatever programming as a front to actually try to push religion. I remember there was a time this is back when I was still living in Ohio, and the sister was talking about doing some work in the community, creating like a life skill summer camp. So we meet up and we're chopping it up about what the curriculum would be. And then she just says, well, I really want to use this as a way to get people to become Christians. So I said, you're trying to finagle people. You're not actually trying to help young people learn life skills. You just want them to believe in Jesus. So what we find is even when these churches do create these programs, they don't actually do the job that they say they're going to do.
And that brings up a good point. Yeah, that means that these institutions just can't be trusted.
Exactly. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is just reality. I'm like, man, you ain't trying to help no kids learn life skills. Matter of fact, at Dio House at University, they won the national championship, and they kept pushing all this, God and all this stupid stuff. And so one of the players, he left the team, and his mother tweeted on X. She said, "Well, you don't get any playing time at Ohio State unless you're a Christian."
Oh wow.
Yeah.
What school was this?
This is at Ohio State.
Oh. Whew.
Yeah.
I mean, is Ohio State? I mean, public funded?
Yeah, it's a public school. So, for example.
Oh yeah, isn't it gonna be like church and state? Like you can't enforce. What's that?
I know, but I'm gonna break this down. So Ohio State, they just got their championship rings yesterday at the spring game. On the championship ring that chronicles the national championship, on the inside of the championship ring, they have a cross.
And it's a state-funded school.
Yes.
I feel that's a lawsuit coming on right there, man. You can't have.
This is a fucking problem. So now you see what I'm saying? It's a problem, and we know that Christian nationalism is a derivative of white nationalism, and white nationalism is a derivative of white supremacy. So you have black people promoting white supremacy and white nationalism, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
That's why it goes so deep, and why it's problematic.
Yeah, no, I didn't know about that one.
Yeah, these are real issues that we're facing. Like I said, these school churches, like I said, because I grew up in it, man, please, you ain't learning nothing. They're just trying to get you to believe in Jesus. That's it. You ain't learning anything. You aren't learning how to play sports or anything. They pushing Jesus. As a matter of fact, when I went to the summer camp with my son, when we got there, the guy who was supposed to be his art teacher, he was sitting in there pushing Jesus. I told the lady who was the director, I said, go in there and look right now. He's doing it right now. And she was like, oh my, yeah, I really am going to have to talk to him. Because that's the only thing that's important to him.
Yeah.
They don't care about treating people's needs as holy.
But that's the whole thing about, these Abrahamic religions. There's this thing where you're going to get, your needs met in the afterlife. I'm like, bro, you would not take that deal with anybody else. If I say, hey, loan me $10,000 and I'm gonna pay you back after you die. Like no one will take not after I die, because it's still a chance you can get the money after I die. No, after you die, you gonna get the money. Like, come on, bro. Like that. Yeah, like come on, man. Like that's. I mean, I get it. I get it because I was in the church too, so I understand how appealing that can be. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like the carrot and the stick of religion. The carrot is you get to go to heaven. The stick is you're gonna go to hell. Like that. I mean, but I don't know. Like at some point, and it's so crazy that I ain't gonna put the person. I know somebody who was a Jehovah's Witness, and it was so funny to me because they they don't celebrate holidays or whatever, and they were so offended at the idea of like Halloween. They were so offended at the idea of like kids knocking on their doors unannounced and soliciting for candy. And I had to smirk to myself because I'm thinking to myself, like, bro, you do that every Sunday. You go to you be knocking on everybody's door. And now all of a sudden it's a problem with little kids coming and looking for candy. Like, come on. But, religion, I think it's just religion in general can't occupy the same space in your mind that your critical thinking and logic and reason. It just can't occupy the same spot. And I just think that I think that Black people would just do better, if we can just look at the world. But it's not even that. Like we have to replace, our religion with basically an Afrocentric, Pan-African, Black, frame of reference. Yeah,
because I remember I used to date a sister who was a Jehovah's Witness, and so of course we were at a Kwanzaa celebration, and she was like, "Well, I'm going to get in trouble by my religion for celebrating Kwanzaa." And so I remember he said, so you're going to be punished by your religious institution for celebrating your own culture. That's a problem.
Yeah.
But then you don't see
Yeah.
that as a problem? Yeah. But like I said, one of the issues is these institutions promote blind obedience.
Yeah.
So, eventually she ended up, disabusing herself of that belief system. But once
That's
again,
good.
like, and this is the problem with when you have people who are religious, is because logic, reason doesn't matter. It's all about what you believe. Facts don't matter. And so, that's one of the actual signs of a cult is when you present someone factual information and they dismiss it. So these are
Yeah.
the issues that, unfortunately we find ourselves in. And these are some of the adverse effects that, of course, religion have on our people, particularly Abrahamic religions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And like I said, a side note: have you spoke to what's his name? Cartwright, Willie Cartwright of the Save the Sane. Have you?
I have not. I need to reach out. I'm going to send him a message today because I still got his website up.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Oh.
I'm gonna reach out to him.
Yeah. No.
But the
Like
thing
I
is,
said,
I want to actually read his book before I
Mhm.
reach out, but that way I can interview him on what he actually wrote. But yeah, we're able to take care of business. But yeah, but once again, family, appreciate everyone for tapping in. As I said before, we had the brother come on, and as you know, it doesn't matter what end of the spectrum you're on. I allow you to come on and be part of the conversation, but I can allow you to move the goalposts or make claims that are simply opposed to facts. Right? And what we tend to find, particularly when you actually pin someone into a corner intellectually, they would start trying to say, well, what about this and what about that? And as you know, I do a great job of saying we're not discussing this, we're discussing that. Right? We're not discussing that, we're discussing this. And I'm going to do a show probably on Wednesday regarding do Black Republicans make excuses for racism? Because I just saw a clip from the TV show in Houston where they did a panel on that. And when they asked the question, they wouldn't give a direct answer. They kept talking about, well, liberals and the left and the left. And it's like, that's not what I asked you. It's a simple yes or no. Right. So we will do a show on that most likely on Wednesday.
What was the name of that show you were watching?
I can't recall the name of the show. It was actually a news channel from
Okay.
Houston. Yeah.
Okay. And what was the top? What question did they ask?
Do Black Republicans make excuses for racism?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Any final thoughts from you, brother Sandman?
yeah. I was just tapping back in because I heard LMA bringing up the atheist church thing, and I thought that was an interesting concept. The only problem I have with it really is every time I go on these media channels and they talk about these atheist subjects, they want to promote like Satan. So if you
No,
don't believe in God,
that's
why do
not
you believe in
atheism.
Satan?
Well, that's not
That's not
atheism.
atheism, then.
That's not atheism. These people are actually Satanists then, because atheism doesn't believe in any type of supernatural being whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's not atheism. But I think that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because what may be happening, and we know this is a real issue. You have people cosplaying as atheists when they're actually are Satanists.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Just
that,
like
and
just like there are oftentimes you find a lot of Black Republicans who would cosplay as Black nationalists or Pan Africanists, right?
But they
And,
actually
for
serve.
example,
Yeah.
that would be what's the dude in Atlanta who be doing the trips?
It is the what?
The brother from Atlanta that be doing the trips, Dinah Samir,
oh,
Oh
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
right? So this tends to be an issue. So
Well, the thing is, though, when you label yourself something that's like anti-theist, because that's what an
Hmm.
atheist is, and someone who's an anti-theist, then you're labeling yourself based on the precepts of a something else instead of like creating your own definition
Well,
of yourself.
well, I think what ends up happening is kind of like what that little woman said is that when you're, let's say, again, like I said, we become anti. I mean, we become atheists, right? But like I said, so you can see that there's some type of aversion to Christian theology. Well, who else has a aversion to Christian theology will be Satanists, right? So they can just glob on and pretend, you know what I'm saying? Because I am against A, I must be for B, and that's where that kind of logic, and it gets people all the time, So, and people fall for it. They don't know what questions to ask. And like I said, I'm not going to know until you actually say something. So let's say, let's say I'm a black person and I'm going and I have an issue with the Democratic Party, and I could be talking shit about the Democratic Party. There could be two people I'm talking to, somebody who's also doesn't like the Democratic Party, and there could be a Republican, right? And so all three of us will be talking shit about the Democratic Party, but I'm not going to know that one person is a Republican until he opens his mouth, But then by that time, we have infiltrators. They can try to, steer the conversation towards the Republicans, where it's just, hey, I just have a problem with the Democrats. I mean, say I was for Republican. I'm just against the Democrats right now, and that's a easy mistake that people can fall into.
Yeah, that's basically what I was saying. Is like there's no they have this one saying that there's no such thing as bad public publicity or
Publicity,
what-
yeah.
publicity. Yeah, my bad. No such thing as bad publicity. So you could be anti something and you're just giving just as much uh, um, recognition to whatever you anti just by being anti that. Why not just say, hey, this is a Pan-African church?
Yeah. But you do bring up a good point. I guess that, like I said, if you're having conversations with people, you kind of need to make a point and ask them where do they stand. Because, like I said, a lot of times, atheists will get kind of pinned down where they say, like, okay, what are you for? And because, like I said, atheism is just like, it's not necessarily saying what I'm for. It's just saying that I don't believe in a certain thing. So a lot of people can get pinned down for that. So it's maybe a good idea to just ask them, okay, what is it that you do believe? What is it that you know, what is your worldview, as opposed to just saying we're just ragging on, I know what you're against. And so I think people just need to ask that question.
Yep, I understand the concept. I just think like on a macro sense, the impact of moving in that direction have an effect on the public in a different way than it might have an impact on us anecdotally.
Hmm.
And that would be key for any organization if you want to have like a general impact and an outcome of a particular situation. Just little things like that, a title, you know, can be a defining information, or it could be a defining uh, um, part of the organization that really moves it forward. Just the label alone.
No, I get it. Yeah. Yeah. Because, yeah. A lot of times, yeah, atheist. Because I think most people who are atheists also find themselves to be humanists as well. I think those two kind of go together as a moral framework. I've heard of humanism. I haven't looked too much into it. I'll give it a look at it one of these days. But yeah, I do get your point. Like there needs to be something that says instead of saying what you're against, you got to say what you're for. And like yeah, with your name, your name needs to be something that adequately reflects your views. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. And I've been like watching some of them debates, atheists up against like Abrahamic religion debates and the humanist thing. I heard other content creators bring it up, and they bring it something to the effect of, they'll say something to the effect of that morality is a natural human trait that doesn't have to be taught via any theology. But
Well, yeah, one of the best examples of that is the Code of Hammurabi, which is the oldest written criminal justice text, a code of laws that we find in human society. And in the Code of Hammurabi, we saw the laws were biased towards the wealthy. For example, and this is a direct quote from the Code of Hammurabi, and people could fact check me if they want, where the law, this was the law, that if a poor person stole from a rich person, the punishment was death. But if a rich person stole from a poor person, all they had to do was basically pay a fine, and whatever they took, they had to be able to give it equal value.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we also have to keep in mind that civilization is based on slavery to a certain extent.
I wouldn't say
Because
that.
No, what do you mean?
well, like
When you say civilization, which civilization?
Which,
now,
yeah.
I would say that all right, I'll be like fully transparent with you, right? I did some research on one of those artificial intelligence websites, right, or applications, and I asked it like, what questions like why did slavery begin, or what was the nature of slavery in Africa, and
Mm-hmm.
the response it gave to me, I thought was pretty reasonable and logical. It stated that
Okay.
um, Africans had slaves, in pre the transatlantic slave trade because we needed them for farming.
Needed them
So
for
prior to
what?
that,
No. See, so here's I'm gonna say this. I think if you want to learn about uh, pre-transatlantic slavery in Africa, you need to read the actual scholarly historical literature on the subject matter, because
well,
that is
it cited a lot of different articles from different texts.
well, I'm telling you because I actually read the literature. I have a master's degree in African studies, and that wasn't the reason.
Okay, so what was the main reason why there was slavery?
Yes.
I mean, but just from
Let
a
me answer the
human
question.
perspective.
Let me
Okay,
answer the question. So, a couple of things. In order to be enslaved in a traditional African society, you had to either be someone who committed a crime, an egregious crime, or a prisoner of war, or you were repaying a debt. The slavery in traditional African societies wasn't racially based. It wasn't ethnically based. It also you were not dehumanized, right? So this wasn't the utter dehumanization of a person, and it was for a set period of time. It wasn't lifelong.
right. So what did they use those slaves for though?
For
What
and
was
for
their labor?
the label the label that was used for was for a variety of tasks. So some was domestic, some was in the field, some were people were builders, other people were of course served and they were what's the word that people use, mercenaries, right?
Yeah.
There was a number of different tasks that individuals were used
Yeah.
for. But I
But
would
I think,
I would real quick, brother LMA, and I'm gonna shut up and let you tap in. If you want to learn about actual history, any history, don't go to Google. Don't do actually read scholarly literature on the subject matter.
Right. And I would just
Brother
say
LMA.
that from a civilization standpoint, those are all of the things that you need. If you have like a large group of people congregating in one area in a community, you need guys that's going to work the field, that's going to be the
right.
soldiers, that's going to do domestic tasks, and that's necessary. You could call them
But yeah,
slaves
but
or
you have
whatever you
people
But
want to
that
they
label
don't have
them,
to. They don't have to be
but it's
slaves, though. They don't have to be
necessary.
slaves, though.
Right.
You don't have to
They
be a
don't have to
slave
be.
to do that.
Right.
Because if you didn't have slaves, you would have to still do those things anyway. So yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
you
think.
can
I
only
don't
do
think.
it
I
for
think the
you and
issue.
your family.
Right, but I mean, but communities come together all the time, and they can work it together. Like it's not just you're not doing it
yeah,
just for your
matter
immediate
of fact,
family. You're doing it for
if
the entire for the group.
society, right? If you read actually Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and we know Walter Rodney was a historian, he talks about how in traditional African societies, men actually were women did the grunt of the agricultural labor. That was how the system was set up. He said specifically that men were able to use women's labor to the benefit of society, particularly agriculturally. So you don't have to have slavery to do that.
And what did the men do when women were doing the brunt labor?
Yeah, so men typically ran the government and the military in traditional African societies.
So they just sat around and did nothing?
No, I said they ran the government and the military.
So if they're running the government, then in the military, then they have nothing to do unless it's a war.
No, I mean you still have a job to do, even if there isn't a warfare. Just like here in America now, in any society, just because you aren't at war doesn't mean that you aren't doing work.
Uh,
But like I said, that's why it's important that you ingratiate yourself with the actual literature on traditional African societies. And what I can do is I can make a list and put it up on my channel. Because what happens is that there's so many gaps in the literature that you're taking a very simplistic view, right? Rather than actually being able to explore the historiography and then understanding, okay, this was the division of labor, this is what was being done, so on and so forth. That's why I'm not a fan of AI and all that type of crap. Because if you want to learn, and I would tell my students is if you want to learn history, you have to actually read history. If you want to learn what happened, you have to read. You can't go off a conversation. You can't go off Google. You actually have to read the scholarly literature on the subject matter.
right.
But I
And
think
I would appreciate it if you left those texts on your page. I'd like to check them out.
Yeah, I'm going to have to put that together. Hopefully, I can do that tomorrow.
yeah, like I said, I
But
think, and
go
also,
ahead.
yeah, I think one thing we have to be careful because we're looking at ancient times through our modern day lens.
That's true.
Now, the division of labor may not have been pleasant, it may not have been fair, saying, but it's not. I wouldn't call it slavery. I think that's the point of contention that we're having is that some societies, how can I put it? Some societies can be supercharged by slavery, or they can they can be supercharged by slavery by using their slave labor to using that capital for further
Right.
expansion. But not all societies need that. And I think that most societies will be better off without, more just and more moral without them. But I just think that, obviously, even those ancient societies weren't thinking in terms of us. You know what I'm saying? They weren't thinking in terms of, 1,000 years from now, what will our society look like? Okay, so
Right.
let's make sure that we make the correct steps now. They were just living their lives trying to survive because, times were harsher.
Right.
They didn't have internet, they didn't have the world's collective knowledge at the palm of their hands. They didn't have it. So they were just trying to figure it out on their own. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't characterize ancient times that way to say
And if
that they
I
needed
could,
slavery. Yeah.
the only African nation that I can recall from my research that actually their slavery enslavement of peoples was their primary mode of economic production was the home. The homie. So that
And
is
then the question,
something to consider as well.
I have a question for that. Was the slave trade only when the Europeans came along, or were they doing slave trade prior to the Europeans and the
Well,
Arabs?
it became their primary mode of production when Europeans came along.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I said, man, we got to make sure that because these Christians they catch a lot of heat, but we got to make sure that these Muslim Arabs they got to catch some of this too because they
Yes,
were
sir. Yes, sir.
terrorizing the African continent as well. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. So
always
yeah,
I always
I
find it
think to
funny.
put that together right now, family, it's going to be a little bit difficult because all of my library is in storage right now. So I'm gonna have to try to make that list for you, brother Sandman, really off the dome. But I can say one book to read would be, golly, hold on, let me see if I can Google it. Let's see. All right, so yeah, so here's the name of the book. Matter of fact, I'm gonna just bring it up for you so you can see it yourself. This would be a book to read. This one left an indelible imprint. So one book to read in terms of the internal slave trade in Africa is Anthropology of Slavery, The Womb of Iron and Gold, right? This was an award-winning book. Another book that I had to read was Maiden's Mill and Money, Capitalism and Domestic Community. All right, so this is a study of different modes of production which existed in Africa prior to colonization. So something to consider here. So yeah, Clark. But this is the big one. If you really want to look at, of course, the domestic slavery in Africa, of course, Anthropology of Slavery, The Womb of Iron and Gold would be the text that you would want to take a look at. And this, if I remember correctly, this was an award-winning text. One of the best books in African history. The year it was published, which was 1986.
Okay, yeah, that'll be my next literature that I read. So that we can have more of a in-depth discussion on it in the future.
Right. And just to consider, just to let you know, Melosu, it was French, and so some of the translations kind of rough because he's using a lot of dense literature, but you should be able to get through it. Because I remember when I had to take my class on the transatlantic slave trade, we had to read 6 books in like a 8-semester course, an 8-week semester. But this is one of the books we had to read from cover to cover. Yeah. So, but all right, family, listen, we're going to close things out. I appreciate everyone for tapping in. Until next time, family, y'all know what to do. Always bet on Black. Peace. Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, here at Lumumba Speaks, we always bet on Black. Peace.